Welcome to the circle, everybody. It's so great to be with you. My name is Brian Piergrossi. So happy to be with Alison Sher, author of the book, The Social Contagion, Viral Ideologies, and the Culture War for America's Future. What a great title. That's a title that I would open the book and check it out and take a look at it and tell all my friends about it. Um, and I saw also that you're a strategist, a narrative strategist, I understand. And so I believe that's helping people to like write novels and books and nonfiction as well.
Yes, and also helping companies, startups in particular, have been my realm of focus with their messaging and communicating who they are and what they do to their audience and all the kind of content strategy that goes around with that. So that's what the term narrative strategist means.
Hmm. Sweet. And
Yeah.
you've been writing for a while, and I think you were telling me before we started that you used to write about chicken.
Yeah. So I started my career as a food writer and I did that for 5 years. And eventually I got a little sick of writing about chicken. I felt like there was more to the human experience that I wanted to dive into and express through words. So I decided at that point that I was going to write my first book, and I was pretty young. And that was called The Millennial's Guide to Changing the World.
Yep.
Very ideal. Oh, Will, no way. You're so sweet. He's so sweet. Will's holding it right
Will's
here.
holding the book. Let's see if we can get a shot of that. Yeah, there it is. The Millennial's Guide to Changing the World.
I literally came across it. I was unloading a box today and I saw this and then I saw you were gonna be on the podcast. I was like, oh, that's cool.
God works in
Synchronistic.
wondrous ways. Beautiful.
Yes. It's
Yeah,
a great book. I
Oh,
love I
yeah.
thank
love your
you.
flair in it. Yeah, I was rereading some of the points. I don't know if we should go through some of this too.
We could
Well, that
definitely do
was,
that.
that was almost in 2018 that published. So I've evolved a lot in 7 years. How I see
Yep.
the world has evolved a lot in 7 years. I wanted to create this next book that would capture some of that evolution. So that's where the social contagion comes in. And it was very much inspired by what we have all collectively experienced since the pandemic and how the pandemic has shaped what we're going through right now in current events.
Sweet. Well, tell us, how has it shaped what we're going through
Oh
in current
man.
events?
Well, one of the biggest things I see, and I think for everyone, sense making, it's like a popular term that's
Yeah,
used
that's an
as we're
important
trying,
term. That's a
right? As
lot
we're,
to me. That's a lot of what the intention of this project is sense making, like trying to understand what's going on and what's the best way to navigate the world. Getting the accurate information as best we can. So yeah, I'm all for it.
yeah, it's increasingly difficult. And I love what you're doing, Brian, because I believe we have to put all of our brains together and
Right.
even like have some semblance of understanding because perception is so subjective. But one
I
of,
would say, can I just say one thing on that? What I
sure.
find is the most important thing above, like people say, like, where do you get your media? What media do you use? And I think that's a good question. It's an important one, but to me, the most important thing for me to figure out what's going on is to actually talk to actual people and like just find out what's going on with them. Because that's the only way that you get like it's not because almost every media source has some agenda, what they're trying to, push you towards. And so I just wanted to put that in, like this kind of conversation where we're actually talking to each other and people are actually genuinely curious and inquiring and interested is really important.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as I would talk to people getting research for the book, people see things so
Right,
drastically differently,
right,
right?
right.
So, and it's important. I think one of the maybe greatest tragedies that has emerged since COVID is that there's this increased tribalism and the media is bifurcated so that there are these two narratives that usually ally with the left and the right.
Hmm.
And that creates this culture war that I'm talking about. But if you get too into your own silo of consuming media that has a confirmation bias that supports your way of looking at what's happening, and you don't talk to people who maybe see things differently, it's very easy to become isolated in your point of view and almost angry at the people who the media is telling you are the cause of the problems that we're politically battling right now inside of this country. So I think
Totally
it's
agree.
it's it's super important.
Yeah, and it takes actual effort, like an investment of time and energy, to actually have that intention and focus to find out what the other perspective is or other perspectives are to help inform and broaden potentially your own perspective.
And at the end of, I'm basically almost done with the book. I don't even know what perspective is true, but I have created a bipartisan analysis of the events that have transpired and how different forms of media have influenced the narratives that we're using to sense
Mhm.
make right now in this time.
I will tell you one thing that I find interesting is how, I think this is an interesting question. How important are feelings or emotions to you? I think that's a big question because I find for some people that's like kind of the most important thing. And so that everything kind of gets filtered around people's feelings and, being sensitive to people's feelings and, is this hurting people's feelings and like that's sort of and then there's other people where that's not so important. And so that's its own bifurcation line, I find, is like how important is like people's feelings, right? And I know that's like there's even layers to that and like sometimes it's important, sometimes it may not be important, but that's an interesting thing I've been looking at.
Yeah, what is it like? Ben Shapiro has like a this might not fact check. Ben Shapiro has like a coffee mug that's like liberal tears, and he drinks it every morning. And I think the side that maybe has the stereotype of being more emotionally driven would be
Hmm.
the political left.
Yep.
But I wouldn't say that characterizing the right as being totally fact-based is accurate either. Um, so it is interesting. There's just a lot of hypocrisy on both sides. And I would say in many ways they're guilty. It's like any fight, any unresolvable conflict, you're often blaming the other person for something you yourself are also doing, but perhaps like unconscious of it or even deliberately hiding it. But yeah, as far as feelings, I think in my first book, I was much more feeling based,
Hmm.
had a lot of ideals
Hmm.
around how I thought the world should be. And I'm like, let's
Hmm.
change the world into this
Yep.
because this is what I feel is moral and just
Hmm.
and the world I want, or
Yeah.
what I think would make me feel better,
Hmm.
which is interesting because now that I've developed more cognitively, I see that is, it's just youthful idealism and stuff like that. But um, it is interesting. I mean, feelings in many ways too influence people's perspectives because they've personally experienced it. A story I could tell is I was just with a friend who was in Spain and he was mugged and his knee was shattered while he was assaulted by an illegal immigrant. And he was dating this girl who was felt very strongly that we should help all immigrants. And they got into this big fight about immigration, right? And he's like, how can you not care that I was like, my leg is never going to be fully functional again because of one of these like more characterized immigrants that is there to do like crosses the border to do crime, right? Like a more criminal immigrant, not that
Hmm.
all illegal immigrants are
Hmm.
like that, but she was very emotionally driven in that people from privileged countries should extend their resources to anyone who needs them. And I think that is just one anecdote of a lot of what goes on, right? And they ended up breaking up because they couldn't reach a agree to disagree moment with each other because they felt so strongly about the different sides of that debate, which is kind of sad to me. And I think the point of the book is to maybe foster a little more compassion and
Yeah.
understanding for people who see things differently right now.
How has it been for you? Like getting into these like really hot button triggering issues for people and like kind of getting right in the middle and like, kind of trying to hear both sides. I'm sure like people get worked up and, like what is that experience like for you?
I think at this point I have a little bit, I've developed somewhat of a thick skin that I don't, I'm not trying to be polarizing. I'm trying to
I think you're trying to do
write
the
about,
opposite.
right. I'm trying to write about the polarization and in the hopes of like diffusing it. So
Yeah.
in that way, I'm in somewhat of a safe zone here. But I will notice like whenever I post online and I even have a slight edge towards, I'm trying to prove my point that this is right,
Hmm.
it will polarize, right?
Hmm.
I will get hate.
Hmm.
One post I wrote about that was like about Israel and everything that's going on in the Middle East. And for good reason, right? Like people are dying, like lots of people are
Hmm.
dying, and there's a lot of pain there.
Hmm.
And then I started to listen to the people who pushed back at me for whatever perspective I felt in that moment was righteous. And then I was like, you know what, maybe I don't even know. I just like that process though, I started to rethink my position on what I had just posted. So for me, that is exciting,
Mm, that's good.
right?
Right. So instead of being entrenched in a position, you're
Yeah.
actually someone who wants to learn and expand your awareness and expand your perspective.
Yeah, like the fluidity of my consciousness, right? Developing
Right.
that to
Right.
encompass like more and more points of view. And
Right.
eventually I find that in that process, my emotionality becomes neutralized.
Mm. And isn't that really the hallmark of intelligence? Like someone who's able to continually fi access different viewpoints and perspectives, and potentially integrate those perspectives, right? It feels like to me that's what an intelligent person would do, and someone who's resistant to that or incapable of that wouldn't be able to deepen in their uh, expand and deepen their intelligence.
Yeah, and they'll probably view people who are pushing them against that, pushing against their wall against that as hurting them in some way or like trying
Right.
to,
Right.
right? Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the societal divisions that we're facing in this country. And I call it a culture war in the book, but all physical wars essentially, for the most part, start from culture wars. So my goal with the book is to hopefully just do my little part in maybe mitigating that
Yeah,
with
and
what we
you
have
I
going on
wonder
with
like
Trump.
does the in my inquiry into this with America, which I know the best, but I know these things are happening in Europe as well and other places. Does it need to be a war? Like maybe there's just different cultures. It's like I feel like the funny thing is to me, the people who are very into multiculturalism don't get that point. Like you think they would be the ones that would understand it the best, but they they don't doesn't seem what they do. Like it's like multiculturalism is somehow against another culture that's maybe not into multiculturalism. It's interesting. But my point is that to go back to the original point is like, can you have two cultures without them being at war? They just embrace that they're different and they have different ways they want to live and different ways that they want to operate and different focus points.
What do they call it? The paradox of tolerance, right? Like
I think that's what I'm saying. I haven't heard that phrase, but I think that's what I'm getting at.
at some point we have to stop being tolerant of intolerant people.
But
And
or
I guess
or
the right is categorized, the right as stereotyped as being intolerant of multiculturalism. So then the multicultural lists have to become intolerant of conservative culture, even though they're saying that they're inclusive, right?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty fascinating. But no, for me, I'm not really sure. why I guess I'm so multicultural that I don't think it needs to be a war, you know?
Mm.
It's just like there's always been people of different cultures in the world, and there's been people of different religions and people of no religion and people of, you know. So to me, then the way it operates is kind of the way. So this brings us to 2020 and COVID, right? Because there was this great kind of geographic movement that happened, that's still happening. And I think that's sort of the, to me, that's sort of the answer is just live and be with the people that are culturally into what you're into, and let the other people be into the cultural that's cultural, and then it's kind of like doesn't have to be, I don't have to, doesn't have to be this next step, but if you want to look at it as like a competition, you could kind of see which one's working and which culture is like thriving, you know, and which one's not, and maybe one's thriving in certain ways, not other ways, and this one's thriving in this way, not other ways, and um, but that I saw that happen where it's like people were just, I'm moving from a blue state to a red state. I'm moving from a red state to a blue state, you know, and that it was pretty intense at that time. That's, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Maybe it's not so intense right now, but people literally couldn't. You know, you had the vaccine mandates and lockdowns and masks and um, I can't remember all the things that were going. There was a lot going on at that moment in time. So yeah. So tell us about 2020 and kind of what transpired at that point.
Well, I was locked in I was like self-imposedly locked in my quarantine, as how we all were before we
Hmm.
understood the true fatality of the virus and could
Hmm.
make decisions for ourselves. And, I'm a writer, so I was like, I'm just going to start documenting everything that's happening
Yeah.
right now because there was so much tribal conflict
Hmm.
happening, and there was this like wave of a key part of the book is like the impact of misinformation
Hmm.
and disinformation and on our sense making
Yeah.
abilities, and how trust in the institution of media has just eroded so
Right.
quickly since that time, and piecing together, the sequence of events and the impact that it had on us all. But I was like, I'm just going to write about all this, and eventually, well, at first the book was about like different tribes that were like emerging, like the BLMs, and then remember the Chaz? Do you remember Chaz when they took over
In
the
Seattle.
anarchists? Yeah,
Yeah.
and I actually found out that that's not a new thing that happened. Like anarchists were doing that in the 90s. They called it something else. So these movements and these philosophies, these political philosophies, I guess, were given maybe a handful that we can choose from, and people kind of group according to whatever speaks to them. And then we try to create movements to implement those systems in our society because we believe it'll make it better than it is now. And yeah, that was what the book was more about, of just all these different like tribal groups that were emerging at the time. And then it became more about using that information to understand like what has led up to essentially Trump's reelection, and that the culture war between the MAGAs and the liberals, all of that. And it was like interesting about how the critical mass kind of moved towards Trump enough to get him
Sure. Yeah.
reelected.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for many people that's a tragedy, and to
Right.
many people it's I saw this thing we always hear about, Trump delusion syndrome,
Trump
right?
derangement
Where
syndrome.
you have all this, yeah, Trump derangement
Uh-huh.
syndrome, where you have all this like negative charge towards him that in
Yeah.
some ways is media manufactured, and not really based on facts, and not seeing him essentially clearly. But then on the other side, I'm going to forget the adjective that was used, but there's like a syndrome where you see him as like
Right.
so amazing that nothing he does that's totally shitty
Like a god.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost messianic, and
Yeah.
nothing that he does that's like awful, like inherently awful, will make you withdraw your support from him or actually see things more from this like shade of gray. So this like black and white thinking that Trump, just as a disruptor, as I think one of the greatest disruptors in US history, has he's like free real estate in our head for the past 10 years, and just the psychological turmoil that this man has caused so many people, because it's really
Well,
like so much of the book is about him.
I want to make a actually a law of attraction point here because Trump is the greatest example I've ever seen of this. So one of this is things I talk about with my clients all the time, and we talk about in the men's mastermind is focus on what you're for, not on what you're against. This is like so critical to manifestation and creating. And when you fixate on what you're against, there's a saying that what you resist persists and grows stronger, right? So when you're against something, you actually make it stronger. And it's amazing to me that people don't get that, but all the negativity that's placed on this person just makes him more powerful and more stronger and more talked about and more written about and raises more money and all the arrest attempts and the assassination attempts and all the negative, all of it just makes him more of a focal point. So if people really wanted to make a shift, they would just be like, "Hey, let's actually not give the guy attention. Let's actually put our attention on whoever they like, whoever the candidate they want. Let's put our attention on this person." But that's part of the problem is that person hasn't emerged, you know. But it's a fascinating thing where it's like you can see it playing out, where it's like all the resistance just makes the focal point stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, he does garner the highest ratings of anything on the news, right?
CNN was
And
in the tank and MSNBC when Biden was president.
so I've shared this before online, but I started reading this book by Matt Taibbi, who was a
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah, he's
Rolling
really good.
Stones reporter for
Yeah.
in politics. It's called Hate Incorporated.
Hmm.
And in it, he talks about the evolution of journalism as soon as Trump announced that he was going to run for office. And he said that basically, like, editors across the board were like, you have to take a pro or anti-Trump slant in every single article of reporting that you do. So they created almost like a sport game with him. The media did this, right? And polarized us and became activists, right? They call it the
Yeah.
activist
Right.
media. So this
Right.
was like a very strategic, according to this book, a very
Yeah.
strategic marketing business practice that was
Yeah.
widely developed in order to make money, right? So he created his own kind of media industrial complex. And I don't think he tried to. They created it around him because I guess he's just really good TV, right? He's Mr. Reality TV.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think they've made so much money off
I
of
think
him.
that people really despise the media deeply. And I'd put Hollywood up. I think people really despise Hollywood now too. So I think those are two areas and politicians, of course. But let's just stick with the media for a second. Like I think people really despise the media. And so they they were attacking. I wasn't following politics that closely at this time, but I know that they were attacking Trump. And then he started attacking back, which I'd never seen a politician do that before. He just took them on, and it was like, oh, this is fake news. That embedded that term, fake news, right? And so I think that alone, he was basically like he was going against a force that seemed so powerful, but people didn't like the force, you know. So when you start calling them fake news, and it's like people are like, yeah, well, yeah, that is they are. I don't, it's like it resonates basically is what I'm saying. And so basically he like took on that whole apparatus and won. It's pretty amazing, you know?
Well, in that way, he also destroyed any faith that is left in the accuracy of some of the things that are said against him, like really trying to reveal the damaging things that he does because people can just write it off as fake news, right?
Hmm.
People with the opposite of Trump derangement syndrome
Yep.
often fall into that category. Another key thing that I talk about in the book a lot is like the psychology of the conspiracy mind
Yep.
and like people who tend to see the world and institutions and governments through this lens of it's all a conspiracy.
Yep.
And while there's a lot of reason to think of it that way,
Hmm.
like teetering on the edge of paranoia,
Yeah.
right? And just writing off institutional efforts that are important and trying to do good because they're all evil, right? That's not necessarily healthy either. And I think that that's another kind of like a phenomenon that we're seeing amplify in the result of, yeah, I mean the right definitely being typecast as the conspiracy theorists
Yeah. And then,
at this
but then
point.
on the other side, right, there's people that are extremely naive and think that everyone's just nice and out to help everyone, and the government's there to, everyone in the government's there to make your life better, and there's no conspiracies. And so that's crazy. So I think it's like a case by case basis, being able to really look at each thing individually and being able to, you know, not have a blanket assumption either way, but be able to look at, is there something happening here that's a nefarious agenda or not? And, I think a lot of things are, but a lot of things aren't.
And how, what's best for my own mental health, like what stance or what frame of
Yeah, and
orientation
what can
just
I do
helps
about it?
me. Right. And if it's nothing, then
Yeah,
why am I so obsessed on
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah,
level, right? So,
yeah. Well, I
but
think I actually have an answer to that question. I
okay.
do think that there's people who are very unhappy in their life and very miserable in their life and don't feel a lot of is going for them. And there's a lot of projection onto public figures, you know, whether it's politicians or celebrities or professional athletes, or it's like this hatred that's kind of like it's sort of like way, how would you say, it's like where is it coming from? You know what I mean? And they may give you some rationalization or something, but I think the more happy people are in their own life and the more sense of greater well-being and contentment and fulfillment there is in their own life, then the less they're going to be in wrapped up in a fear-based energy or an energy of hatred, obviously, or, projecting vile, projecting vile onto. But so I think you can see something that's deceptive or see something that's malicious and you can call it out, but it's like that fine line of like not letting it run your life, right? And I think the way you don't want to run your life is to have a life.
Yeah, yeah, the fear-based sensors, the trauma brain, right, is always going to be searching for threats in the environment almost like hyper-vigilantly. And I see a lot of that with people who are almost conspiracy obsessed, right? And maybe their prefrontal cortex isn't totally online of that's the part where you really discern like, is this actually a threat to me? Or am I just sensing it? And the news and the media is just if that's all you watched, the fear porn of it, right? Like
Hmm.
it would just be feeding with you that that is how the world is
Yeah.
when
There is another thing though, where like if you to kind of have a sense of what's going on, because I mean you have connections to Washington D.C., right? So you know that like almost everything's like an agenda. Everything is like, let's put this to get to. It's not necessarily always a conspiracy, right? But there's a sense of like, let's put this out to get to this objective, right? And it's kind of interesting when you can kind of look into like all the different spin and the different things that. So my point is like, you can sort of educate yourself on how like DC works without getting caught in things that aren't true. So if you can actually be accurate to what's actually going on, it actually has a liberating quality to it instead of a disempowering quality to it. You're more like aware and intelligent of how the system works, and you can feel kind of, yeah, empowered in that way.
Th- And the process of writing this book has 100% done that for me because in the past, I've been someone who's more veered on the conspiracy. And I'm not saying that things aren't happening, but I think I've definitely, especially during COVID, it was incredibly activated because it just all felt so nefarious, right? Like
Mhm.
everything that was happening. And definitely like connecting the dots to being like this is part of a bigger agenda. But in
Mhm.
in the book I also write about like all the people who don't believe it was like
Mhm.
who believe like this is like they've quarantined for pandemics for centuries, right? That has been a typical pandemic response that like public health
Mhm.
organizations have taken. So I really try to argue both sides. And then yes, like what I have felt at the end of this process has been kind of like a rational, level-headed liberation. And I see all the things that they're talking about, like the globalist world order takedown. I definitely do think that there are world orders competing against each other right now, and that Trump very much represents one. And I think that they're probably both somewhat dystopian. And I feel very liberated as well now that I've kind of more or
Mhm.
less crossed the finish line.
I guess maybe
But
maybe a more like a better word would be corruption.
hmm
Like there's a lot of corruption in my what I mean I see it all the time, and it's like people, a lot of people that want to make money, a lot of people that want more power. They don't mind lying a little bit or lying a lot to get there. And so, to be able to discern that from the people who have honesty and integrity, which those people exist too. I mean, it's kind of the same thing in your personal life. Like if you're dating or if you're making friends, it's like you want to be able to discern, like, is this person real? Are they coming from a place of integrity? Are they honest? Are they, what's going on with this person? So be able to make that kind of discernment. That's one of the things we've talked about here before, which I find such a fascinating question is like, I don't know how to articulate the answer, but it's like, how do you know if someone's telling the truth or lying, right? Probably the only way, I think the way the best way would be to come into a deeper place of integrity in yourself and self-awareness in yourself. So you could be able to recognize that in somebody else and know if that's not happening to somebody else. But anyway, to be able to discern that, because all of this stuff is coming at us, not just politically, but also like, advertisements from corporations and marketing and, all this stuff coming at us all day long. And to be able to make that discernment and, and have that clarity inside that's the key to the, you were mentioning the sense making. Like that's where it becomes really important.
yeah, you spoke about focusing on what we do want to magnify in the world. And I have a question for you, Brian, of
Oh,
like
fun.
who, like will this leader arise that is the antithesis to all of this that we can trust with our livelihoods and our hopes and our dreams to guide us and lead us. And there is a lot, like one of the things about this time that I'm really fascinated about are like the biblical parallels
Hmm.
that are happening, especially with this idea of like a beast system coming with AI. And then of
Hmm.
course, Trump gets a lot of that. He's King Cyrus, restoring Israel, all these kind of prophecies around him or things that people attach to him. But I guess in that paradigm, we're waiting for Christ to return, right?
Hmm.
But Brian, do you have anyone that you are like looking towards right now who you feel like could be that? I think for some people, we thought that was RFK, right? We were like, oh,
Hmm.
here he is, this third elegant option.
Hmm.
But now he's part of the Trump machine. But
Hmm.
yeah, curious to you, like who are your beacons right
I
now?
think the starting point to me, which is different from a lot of people, and I saw Jacob text, him and I were chatting about this a couple of days ago, is I don't think things are like that bad. Like people think things are so hard. I don't feel that way. I don't feel like we're in this horrific state and things are about to end and the world's coming to an end or we're teetering on the edge of something. Like I feel, and I think a lot of this starts from like where you're at in your own life again, what's happening for you in your own life, because we project that out to the world, quote unquote. But I feel we're in a good place. I feel like pretty excited about where we're at and where we're going. And yeah, I guess I don't know of like if there's going to be like some person that externally solves everything for us in our own lives. But I think starting with yourself, right? Being the change you want to see in the world, and the more that we make these transformations like in ourselves, then I think the world starts to look differently in how we perceive it, how we look at it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I'm like, my first book was about changing the world, but so much of that is about changing how you see the world, right?
yeah.
And all the things that you can't change about the world.
How you see the world, but
And
also actually like literally changing sometimes, lifestyle, things, habits, lifestyle, action-oriented things as well. Your job, maybe, relationships, friends, community, maybe even like where you live, all these things can be things that may or may not be things that are being called forth, in one's life. Spiritually, of course, spiritual connection being primary to me.
yeah, it's interesting because I hear what you're saying, and I definitely teeter with that, finding that balance of like, you know what, just focusing on myself and my life and the kind of endless task that that is, and treating people well despite life's stressors and the challenges that come on, and facing all of that head on, and just being responsible and moving forward
Yeah,
with those things. It's very all encompassing. And then also this, with that, this kind of like urge to understand what's going on in the larger
for
whole.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, knowing that I can't do so much to impact it, but I still, this book is me kind of staying in the arena and being
Yeah.
like, I can just write about it. I don't even have any answers necessarily, but I can sit here and make some sort of form of restorative media
No,
describing
I
it.
think it's really important. I think what you're doing is really important. It's really needed. And it's a similar kind of, intention to, what I have of like exactly what you're saying of like being able to hear the different perspectives and maybe weave some higher order integration into the space. Let me ask you another question and then we'll open it up for these guys to have some questions that want to get involved as well. Do you find that after 2020, have you, and you're talking to people and things that you've observed and, do you find that there was a shift of people from being self-labeled as left to right and right to left? Do you find there was like that shifted the tables of things? Or yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, I think sometimes people tend to focus on the liberals who turn more conservative. But because there's so much radicalization
Hmm.
on both
Hmm.
polarities, I think there has been a equal amount of Republicans who, due to Trump's influence, have decided to become liberal,
Hmm.
right? And I think maybe, it's not talked about as much,
Hmm.
because I think the pandemic was such like a wake up call for
Hmm.
a lot of people who maybe started to believe that there was an agenda happening. And then with that, like that agenda being like this thing of like the globalism and
Hmm.
organizations like the World Health Organization and the UN and all these kind of conservative conspiracies that are like, this is the largest force of evil on the planet right now. Um, People who maybe started to emotionally align with that narrative were like, well, the answer to that is nationalism
Hmm.
and conservatism and smaller government and all the
Hmm.
things that Trump is representing. And he does seem, as I follow him, like he does seem to be fighting that, like some semblance of that world order,
And they
whether
definitely
or
don't
not,
like him.
yeah, like whether or not that is as organized as some people think. And then there's just as many people who see the destruction of how brazen he is with his policies and the impacts of a lot of the decisions that he makes. And I think that they're like, we need to stop him, right? And go towards that side. So I don't know if there's a larger, if it's like disproportionate in any way of more left people becoming right leaning or more right leaning people becoming left leaning. But I think that he as a figure has shaken things up in the pandemic. Him with the pandemic combined, like kapow, right? Has created a paradigm shift in a lot of individuals.
The strange thing to me about there's so many strange things that are fascinating, but one of the many fascinating things to me about Trump is like I don't even to me he's clearly not even a classic right-wing person. Like he's a lot of his perspectives actually where he comes from. Um, he's not that he's labeled like for example this whole tariff thing with that was a left-wing idea of like being against NAFTA, being against free trade. And now because Trump's for it, now all of a sudden the Democrats are against. It's very strange to me how it, like the whole thing of left and right gets like is getting inverted and shifted and a lot of different things I'm finding that used to be considered left are considered like actually if you actually listen to like right wing media, which I know a lot of people don't, but they talk about like how they want peace. They're against they feel like Trump is against war. He's against the war machine. You know, he's against the military industrial complex. And it's like again, use that was like a left wing idea, but now the left wing is like they're for the war, continuing in Ukraine, keep funding the war, keep it go. So it's like all these things are to me, it's like what do these terms even mean at this point? I think some of it's just sort of a way to divide us and separate us. And if you kind of go deeper, it's kind of hard to know what what's what and why this is called that and that's called this. It's pretty interesting in that way, I find.
Yeah. There, I mean, there have been, I think you might, maybe we've had a conversation about this outside, but, you know, the Conservative Party used to be the party that wanted to abolish slavery, right? So
Yeah.
there are times in history where the values of the parties kind of switch. I don't necessarily see that happening in any kind of defined way, like they've like totally flip-flopped with each
I
other.
think so, though. I really think there is a shift, though. For example, another one is free speech. All of a sudden, now the conservatives are the ones that are talking about free speech, and then the liberals are like, we're against, they don't say we're against free speech, but they're against more um, rules around speech. Right. So that's another one that I saw like shift. It's
And it's also very, all this is so nuanced, right? We watched Ben Shapiro fire Candace Owens for like not supporting Israel, right? So, like, not even being able to talk against what Israel was doing on the show. So, that's why I'm saying what I see more happening is like two people yelling at each other because they're angry, but they're like kind of in other ways, like behaving similarly. Um, but I hear what you're saying. At some points, it felt especially during the pandemic, incredibly stark and disorienting about like how are the rebels now,
it
the
seems like
old
the
ones.
anti-establishment party to me is the Republican Party now. That's the way
Yeah,
it seems to me,
totally.
which never used to
Totally.
be the case.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
They were the party of kind of the white guy and the financial corporate class. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and then also pharma, like the liberals were always like critical of pharmaceutical uh, corruption, and then that shifted as well.
right. With Kennedy now
Yeah,
joining the, yeah, I mean, I think the book, if one other goal of it is I do think that the Liberal Party needs to atone for what it did to push people towards the outcome that happened in the presidential election in 2024, because um, there was just so much irrational, there was a lot of like emotionally irrational and straight out damaging policies that were implemented during that time, coming from that side. And I think a lot of people became super disillusioned, and Trump's rallying cry that he's going to drain the swamp and take down the deep state, it started to become like, well, yeah, let's do that. Let's see
Right.
what happens. Yeah, let's see what happens. And I think until the like, I mean, these things are private organizations. The
Hmm.
Republicans and the liberal, I mean, they're private
Hmm.
organizations. So um, they need to come together and have like a board meeting or something, um, and atone publicly, because I think, also now that we've been in office 100 days with Trump, it was interesting writing the book and almost kind of trying to predict, what might that, if he was reelected, what it would be like. And now having experienced 100 days of it, like what the actuality of that is. But I do see the ways that he is can be compared to a fascist, like 100%. If you like look up textbook fascism, like there's a lot of parallels there. And there's also so much slander and misinformation about the policies that he does and who they harm and the intention behind them, that yeah, it's hard to discern, like, is it actually that bad, or is this all like sensationalism? But yeah, it's that's what I would want to see, is the left learning from these mistakes and this extremism, because I do think that both parties
And
embody
having
the values.
having some vision for the future, like having some agenda. Like you can't just be against Trump. That's not enough to like get people to vote for you.
Hmm.
You have to, again, like what are you for? What are you trying to create? Like what's the world you're it's like they're so like obsessed with Trump. All they do is like speak against him, but they don't say anything to like rally people to like a vision that like, yeah, I'm excited, I'm inspired to like go this direction. You know what I mean? It's like that's what's really needed. It's just like you can't just be like the anti-Trump world. Like it just again, it just gives the person more power when that's all you're doing. You're keeping the conversation on the person you don't want the conversation to be on. You know what I mean? Like it's not a winning way of like having a party. So that would be my advice is like really try to think about like what your agenda is, what you want to create, what's the alternative to what he's doing? Like what can you do differently that is going to make America, make Americans' lives better and like communicate that to people and get them to understand it and get it, and then they'll support you.
Yeah, so much to say about that, but to me, the if I were to tie it up with a bow,
Okay, a bow.
it was like the left was just going to be business as usual, and Trump was going to be just like this like potentially catastrophic, cataclysmic shaking up of the system. And I guess like the majority of people wanted that kind of change, right? And so for the left to actually embody, right, some kind of meaningful systemic change, because I do believe that a lot of
Exactly.
us are craving it. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, Will, you wanna get involved? I sense you like to
I was just
share
about to
something.
say business as usual, like destruction of America. That was my reaction to if
Oh, okay.
potentially the direction that I saw the left moving in with Biden, because so many policies were being changed so radically. But uh, that was kind of a rash comment. I'm so impressed with your dialogue, Allison. I really appreciate you just taking the time to think about this stuff.
Oh,
Yeah, you're awesome.
thanks. You're
Big
awesome
heart.
too. Oh,
Yeah,
sweet.
I appreciate it. I mean, I care about this stuff too. I have a lot of thoughts about it. Mostly think that humans are being pushed to make sense on a just a radically new level in terms of who we are and where we are. I think our technology is showing us that our previous kind of stories and myths about where we come from are inadequate, you know? So, um, Yeah, I think we're with technology being pushed to expand to embrace other cultures, embrace other religions, other possibilities, and it's a very exciting but trying time. But I have great faith that we will, yeah, find out that love is at the center of the universe and that we're fundamentally kind of connected to that. So there'll be a moral reason for peacefulness, that we really will find out that what we do to another is we're doing to ourselves because that's literally just kind of a fact written into the quantum book of existence. But previously we, kind of understood that in myths, but we hadn't had that as a collective knowing. But I think we're approaching an era where that may be sort of demonstrated factually, so people will know there really is no death and life is an ongoing story in a much larger context. And those facts will give us, real reasons to choose to be peaceful to one another, is my hope. But that's a whole nother discussion. But I'm interested in the reasons for peace, reasons for forgiving, reasons for not being scared. What reasons do we have to really believe those things, and what results do those emotions and belief systems produce for our communities and in our own lives? And I think spirituality really is the fundamental change belief system about identity that is hopefully that's really the core of this process is who am I? What do I know about myself and value most deeply? What can I rely on? So, um, yeah, I think ChatGPT is going to teach us. It's gonna be awesome. What do y'all think?
Yeah, well, sometimes I think I'm like, if we weren't fighting about, what type of Muslim you were or whether or not you supported whatever immigration, like what
Right.
all, I'm like, maybe the world would really just stand still and like, but for whatever reason, we get very hooked into these constructs, right? And we get very inspired to destroy based on our reasoning behind them. So a lot of this is like unlearning that very primal evolutionary
Totally.
impulse.
Totally. So that is so well said because that is how our reality was. But we have to learn to choose almost against that. So when we have those old sort of fight or flight reactor, strike, as we develop our higher minds through spirituality, psychedelic use, conversation, inspiration, we can make a new choice in the face of like suggestions of, you know, uh, things that would harm ourselves or others. And I think that's the story of kind of evolution as we learn to that, that's the faculty of having a mind, which is, where our pain exists as well, because we're aware of, our perceptions of imperfection or whatever ails us, exists within the mental layer, the things we're hooked on, the things we value. So it's exciting to reveal that layer and take responsibility for becoming one that creates peace. It's like what Jeff Thogmartin was putting out a post on Facebook about actually willing peace to other creatures. And that's almost like seems like a phenomenal, that's like a positive change. If imagine if every culture was teaching that no matter what religion, you seek to will peace to fellow creation because it's literally just one field that's at one with you, and those vibrations must be, sent back to you. Um, I think that stuff's exciting to learn, and the same technology that's like irking us and polarizing us is also revealing this, and people are connecting and learning it. So again, it's like all up to us to choose, how do we want to feel? What kind of world do we want? Choose, choose, choose again. Choose one more time, choose with every breath until that choice is more established as that we are a beacon for peace and have real reason for it. But I think you're just doing such amazing stuff. Big fan, can't wait to read the second book, the
Mhm.
next book, and buy one for my pops.
Oh, thank you,
He's gonna
Will.
appreciate it. Yes, it's
Thanks.
awesome.
I keep looking at this dog, loving up on Arnie over.
Yeah. Kuiper, that's his name, Kuiper.
Well, thank you so much for showing up to this. It means a lot.
Ooh.
Anything else you want to share about your book and your explorations and things you've been
Well,
discovering?
well, no, I mean, I think that's a pretty good This is a pretty good segue, but I've decided that the launch day of the book will be Independence Day.
Nice.
So look out for it. And
Hmm.
I look forward to continuing to have these conversations with you, Brian, as we have for so many years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I find it so fascinating, because again, it's like you almost have to do detective work to try to figure out what's actually happening. So having like people to talk to that are interested in that and inquire into that with you is really valuable. And then to be with people that are also open to instead of trying to like push an agenda on you, we're both open to learning together and potentially expanding or shifting our perspective with more information, new information. I think those are, just to be able to model those kind of conversations, that in and of itself, I think is like the way, right?
Yeah, it's the
So
start to peace building for sure.
yeah. So I'm grateful that you're having the courage to get there and have these people in different perspectives and have them connect with each other and communicate with each other and get these perspectives and share it with people. Like Will said, I think it's great work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks everybody for being here and have a great night.
Good night.